We have the Ayatollah of fantasy rock and roller with us today, Adam Rank. How you doing, Rank?
They look great in person, and I just can't wait till next year where we can pack it full of 25,000.
Hey, Bob, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. I didn't know it was Ball Guys Day. It was being ranked. I mean, how can you lose?
This is the Dynasty Vipers ViperCast.
Hello and welcome to the Dynasty Vipers ViperCast. This is episode 115, and of course, the ViperCast is powered by the Fantasy Points Media Group. And as always, I am joined with the host with the most, Major Caldwell. How you doing today, Major?
I'm good. How's everything?
Everything's good. Everything's good, except for, you may notice here right now, Tara Roberts is not with us today, but you know what? We've got a fantastic guest with us. He has been a mainstay over at Yahoo since 2008, an FSWA nominated and award-winning writer. Please welcome the piano man himself, Scott Pianowski. How you doing, Scotty?
I'm doing great, man. That theme song and opening is so well produced and put together. I'm ready to hit the tackling dummy. You know, I don't know if I'm going to talk football. I'm ready to play football at this point.
There you go.
And that's probably mostly because I didn't put any of that together. People do that. So that's probably why we are. It's kind of like we try and trick people into thinking this is a high-end production, but once they get in here and they see me Major, they're like, okay, this is low income. But hey, you know what? we have a good show. Once again, we're going to talk football. We're going to go behind the grind a little bit later with Scott Pianowski there, talking about his journey within the industry. Because, hey, when you've been at Yahoo since 2008, you've learned a thing or two along the way. But, hey, you know what? We've got articles. We've got stuff coming in. It's the off season. People are consuming. And, Scott, you're not just consuming football talk here. You're going into baseball season and everything over at Yahoo. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, I pride myself being a man of all seasons. We're getting ready for the fantasy baseball season, which we hope will actually take place. Obviously, it's been a really rough time with the standoff. I still think they're going to have a very meaty season. I'll be doing a lot of college basketball work as the tournament ramps up. And I occasionally dabble. I actually won a FSW award back in 2009 for my fantasy golf writing. So I'm a fantasy hockey player. I like to think. I don't know anything about NASCAR, but you want to talk soccer, you want to talk basketball, hockey, golf, doesn't have baseball, you know. But look, we know fantasy football is the gorilla of the fantasy landscape, and that's why we're here. But I'm a fan of all sports and happy to talk about whatever you want.
Well, I would love to get into March Madness because behind the Stanley Cup playoffs, I don't think there's a better tournament in sports than March Madness. I mean, Stanley Cup playoffs, best of 7, 4 rounds. That's a different beast altogether. But the March Madness, win and you're in, 1 and you're done. I mean, when you watch a 15 seed knock off a 2 seed and everything goes crazy, I'm thinking Valparaiso kind of thing here. Steve Nash back in the day, Drew, all these guys that have kind of come up and kind of cemented themselves in college basketball lure. You're like, oh man, that's what it's about. That's what this game's about. That's when it's at the purest form, is it not?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, just the energy, being around all the young people. I attended Providence College. I'm really excited that Providence has their best team they've had in a while. They'll probably be about a 4 seed, the last I saw with bracketology. But as you said, the urgency in the tournament where it's just one and done. So you one team, and college basketball is a game where underdogs can win. If you get hot shooting on the 3-point line, or one of the stars of the big teams gets in foul trouble. And we saw it a few years ago. Virginia was the first number 1 seed to lose, and it turns out they won the whole thing the next year. But I mean, it's just getting to the tournament. Anything's possible. I will at some point this month, I don't know when exactly, but I'll rewatch the 30 for 30 Survive and Advance. That great story about Jim Valvano's 1983 North Carolina State team, which was in perilous danger of losing several games, any of which if they had lost, that they would have not made the tournament. It would have been knocked out of the tournament. They need to basically win so many coin flips in a row. And then you throw in the backdrop of Valvano's personality, and then later he ends up getting cancer and becomes a crusader for cancer research and all this stuff. I mean, it's an unbelievable story. It will invigorate you. It will make you cry. It will make you think. I mean, what do you say? You laugh, you cry, and you think you've had a hell of a day. Long live the words of Jim Valvano. And that's just kind of the spirit of what the tournament is to me. It's so much about fellowship, and basketball is such a game of cohesion. It's a game of, how do you fit with your teammates? It isn't necessarily the 5 best players or the 7 or 8 best players, but it can be how they play together, how they fit as a unit, who the glue guys are and stuff like that. So it's always been a sport that's fascinated me.
And kind of in that spirit right there, fantasy football, we talk about March Madness here and styles make matchups. Well, different strategies make different rosters. They construct it differently. How you view assets, how you tradable, non-tradable. I mean, everyone's got a price. Every player is tradable in one way, shape, or form,
Sure.
no matter how you want to look at it. You throw enough at me, I'll trade you just about anything. So let's talk fantasy football here now. And you came out with an article here not too long ago about trading assets. And then when we're looking at via the draft or via the trade, what are some of the teams managing here? Who they need to be targeting, and who they should be avoiding right now as far as fantasy is concerned?
An NFL team. I assume you're asking for an NFL team. I think the Ravens are in a great position to buy for dynasty. Everything went wrong last year. They didn't make the playoffs. Their 2 best running backs were hurt before a snap was played, and then Lamar Jackson had a season where he couldn't stay on the field for numerous reasons. Their top receiver draft choice, Bateman, had kind of a washout season. He couldn't stay on the field. Hollywood Brown was open the whole season, but he dropped a bunch of passes, left a bunch of points on the field. It turns out that Mark Andrews was the big winner in this offense. He was a difference maker, probably the most important tight end, and maybe you could argue the 3rd most important player in fantasy after Taylor and Kupp in some order. What a season he had. But I believe in the coaching infrastructure. Jackson will be back. They'll have some form of a backfield, which they didn't really have this year. You would think Bateman could take a year, 2 leap. And Brown's always open, man. I mean, I don't worry. We don't worry about drops, right? I mean, remember, Jamar Chase couldn't catch the ball in the summer. I mean, he was fine in the regular season. I'm just glad that Hollywood Brown can run by people. I think the Ravens are, for my money, the best bet to win that competitive AFC North next year. I think they'll be back in the playoffs. And I think Lamar Jackson has a very viable chance to be the quarterback 1. He won't be drafted anywhere near that. And so I would try to get in on the Ravens. As far as a team on the downside, maybe this is just too obvious, but so many things smell bad right now in Arizona. I'm not sure that Kyler Murray is happy there. The strange note that his agent put out that was poorly written, poorly spaced. He's a guy, a lot of times athletes have other sports they play, but it's kind of like a hobby or a dalliance. He was a 1st-round pick in baseball. He's a legitimate baseball prospect. I know right now we don't have actual Major League Baseball, but if he wanted to go down that path at some point, it's a legitimate option for him. I don't think he feels supported by the Arizona organization. I think the bloom's off the rose with Cliff Kingsbury. Look at what a poor job they did getting Rondell Moore integrated into that offense. DeAndre Hopkins is getting to an age we get nervous about. I think Arizona is going to be the worst team in the NFC West next year. And they're a team I really, James Conner had everything fall right. Sounds like they won't bring both him and Edmonds back. I don't know the quarterback's happy. Hopkins, again, at an age I'm concerned about. I don't really trust Kingsbury. I think they could be like a 6 or 7 win team next year.
I want to touch on both those teams here a little bit there, because this, at least me, myself, I am a pro Rashad Bateman kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
Major, what junior college did Marquise Hollywood Brown go to?
College of the Canyons.
That's a little bit of an alma mater there for Major there. If anyone's
Yeah.
not paying attention, as a former junior college running back, Major Caldwell, he's very proud of that. But
Yeah.
I'm a big J.K. Dobbins kind of guy. I mean, we just did a dynasty startup draft, and I think Tara in a 1 QB league got Lamar Jackson in the 9th round, just to kind of give you some idea where Lamar Jackson is kind of going, because people are forgetting about him. But J.K. Dobbins, for me, I have him as a potential top 5 running back in PPR next year, because he is that good. I don't think that being a top 10 is out of the realm of possibilities for him. Do you see him as high as I do, or you still got him in that kind of that 12 to 15 range?
I'm high on him. You might be an eyelash, maybe a step ahead of me, but I'm not that far behind you. Remember, he had, I think, a run in his rookie year of scoring touchdowns in 7 straight games. The big thing for Dobbins, if he's going to be a top 10 guy, he needs to be active in the passing game. And Lamar Jackson hasn't always been. We know some quarterbacks really love to lean on throwing to their running backs. Drew Brees and the Saints did that for like 13 years in a row. Tom Brady was always throwing to his running backs, and look at what he did for Leonard Fournette last season. All the times he threw to James White back in New England, stuff like that. if they can get Dobbins active in the passing game, and look, he doesn't need to catch 90 balls. He doesn't need to be Christian McCaffrey or Austin Eckler. I'd be happy if he caught 50, 45, 50, 55 passes. If he does that, I think he has a path to be a top 10 running back. And also the other thing that you have to remember, yes, major injury. Yes, season-ending injury. At least it happens so early that we can feel pretty good about his prognosis and where he'll be health-wise when the season starts, as opposed to if this had happened in week 15 or week 16 or in the playoffs or whatever, then you have to worry more about the timetable. He's going to have basically a full year of rehab. Now, maybe Dobbins, a lot of times it's a year two thing coming back from injuries. Maybe the real to-go year for him will be 2023, but I'm going to be proactive for sure trying to get him on rosters next year.
How do you think the split's going to be between Gus and JK? You think that's going to be 50-50 or is it going to lean more on Dobbins?
I think it's definitely going to be an A and a B. It's going to be a 70-30. At most, I could see Edwards being 65-35, but I think they clearly view Dobbins as a featured back and as a primary back and as the guy they're going to lean on.
Now, turning our attention to Arizona, I think I've solved everyone's problems here. Deshaun Jackson for Kyler Murray. Everybody's happy. Okay, maybe not quite, but hey, I seen somewhere that the players' bonuses are guaranteed for the playoffs, correct? And coaches' bonuses, that's up to the discretion of the owner. So I heard at one point that there's a possibility that maybe the owner didn't want to play the payoff bonuses for the coaches because the A, B, C. Well, Cliff Kingsbury, his agent, happens to be the same agent of one Kyler Murray. So maybe there's a little bit of one-upsmanship going on there on that end of things. But hey, you know what? This is all hearsay. I have no proof, none of that to be true. So, I mean, things are going to get, I think they're going to get uglier, but they're going to get better in the desert.
Worried about that. And remember, for fantasy purposes, and maybe part of it was injury related, but we saw Kyler Murray really back off the running part of his game. And I don't know that he can be a major factor as a fantasy quarterback if he has to do it almost exclusively with his arm or primarily with his arm. What made him so dynamic for fantasy before last season is he was just uncoverable at the goal line. He'd gobble up rushing touchdowns that were going to James Conner last year. And it seemed like he could just rip off a 15-yard run whenever he wanted. He didn't want to play that way. Even when they got in the playoffs, I remember thinking that his rushing prop was a great bet in the playoffs. And, they got way behind in that game, and he really didn't look like he wanted to run. Now, that can be because you don't trust your offensive line. That be because you don't feel good about your health. It can be a lot of different things. But we also know as quarterbacks get older and as they get more proficient as throwing from either from the pocket or we know Kyler needs to throw from different platforms sometimes. He's one of the shorter quarterbacks in the league, but maybe it's also just a natural progression that he's going to run less as he gets deeper into his career. If he's not going to be one of the 2 or 3 best running quarterbacks, I think we're just looking for a fantasy quarterback, a guy that I really don't want to draft. And again, what can you say positively about his receiving crew? I mean, DeAndre Hopkins, probably a borderline Hall of Famer right now, but he's on the back 9 of his career. And who else on that team excites you? Christian Kirk's just a guy. They couldn't get anything going with Rondell Moore. I mean, who's he throwing the ball to?
That's
those are all very good points.
Yeah, but let's get off the losing teams and receivers. Let's get to a receiver that is a Super Bowl MVP and just the guy out here in LA. I'm an LA guy myself. We had a couple weeks to digest the Super Bowl now. So what do you think is a legacy of Cooper Kupp being the first white receiver to win the Triple Crown? And what else? Like, where do you see him falling in redrafts and dynasty drafts?
First of all, I think he just had, when you factor in the regular season and the playoffs, I think he just had the best receiving season in NFL history. And the only player, now as far as playoffs go, some of the Jerry Rice seasons match up. Right. The Larry Fitzgerald year in 2008 when Kurt Warner had that final renaissance and they went to the Super Bowl and lost to the Steelers ultimately. Fitzgerald was unbelievable, but Kupp's numbers match up with those guys for his playoff performance. And then, as you said, MVP of the playoffs. And this comes on the heels of winning the Triple Crown at receiver. It's so funny that if you had just gotten 2 things right with 2 receiver rooms, if you had read them correctly, if you had said before the season, you know what? I think Deebo Samuel's the guy in San Francisco. I don't think it's Brandon Ayuk. And I think Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, good player. I think Cooper Kupp's the guy I want in LA. If you had gotten both of those right and focused on Samuel and Kupp, just think of how far you could get so many things wrong if you'd gotten those two things right. Even just getting one of those things right was a huge leg up in being successful in fantasy. And I know the only thing about Kupp to be concerned about is, he came into the league at an advanced age, and
Right.
he's in his late 20s now. So you get a little bit concerned about that. And one thing I've tried to do as I've gotten deeper into my fantasy life, and also the way the game has shifted, the players come out of college quicker. And a lot of times, I don't want a running back on a second contract. A lot of times receivers, once they hit 30, it seems like their usefulness goes out the window. There are so many receivers in the league right now who are dominant players who are in their late 20s, like Kupp, like Devontae Adams. There are a handful of guys like that. And I'm going to be careful. I don't want to. This is where in Dynasty, I would, and I love what Matt said earlier, anybody is tradable. Don't have this idea that somebody's untouchable. If you have Cooper Kupp or Jonathan Taylor, this is the great time to make it known that they're available. You can always say no. Just, you don't know what somebody might do. Somebody might give you the grandfather offer that you literally can't say no to. So don't be afraid to just throw stuff out there. I think it's actually a good time in Dynasty to shop Cooper Kupp because his value is never going to be higher. Again, you trade him for the first thing you get? Of course not. This isn't like a basketball team that comes over half court and just jacks up a three like your Steph Curry. Shop him around. And if it's one of those things where if the deal doesn't automatically validate itself and say yes for you, you're probably going to say no. But be willing to trade anybody. Again, I thought Matt made an excellent point when he outlined that. But to me, Kupp just had, when you incorporate regular season and playoffs, I think he just had the best receiver season in history. And this is coming from somebody, I would tell you, Jerry Rice is the best football player I've ever seen. So it's not like I'm in any way trying to diminish Rice's legacy, but Cooper Kupp just did stuff that I've never seen anybody do for a 5-month period.
It seems like Kupp is my bad, Matt. It seems like Kupp is just getting started though. It seems like I don't know. He has one of those like old man games, like the old guy on a basketball court who can still hoop and shoot threes in the corner. I think he has that game where he's not really relying on his speed too much, not really relying on his athletic ability too much. Is mostly his route running and having perfect timing with the quarterback. So it feels like he's just getting started. I don't think he's like 27, 28. I think he should. I think it feels like he has like at least 5-year run in him.
Yeah, he's got so many. I think he's going into his age 29 season. I think I have that right. But you talk about the route running. Obviously, they made in the offseason a major quarterback upgrade. Jared Goff, probably about league average. Matthew Stafford is just below that MVP level of quarterback. So a big upgrade. And then the McVay scheme, which has so many route combinations, and they do so much to get to scheme. It's funny, whenever you're playing against Cooper Kupp in fantasy or rooting against the Rams or whatever, if you happen to be, you always ask yourself, why is he so wide open? They're the guy they're going to throw the ball to 10, 12, 15 times a game. How is he running with nobody else in the screen? And again, that's the route running, that's the timing, that's the quarterback, and it's the fact that McVay's scheme, they love to run two different, they run all those rub routes, they run all those combination routes where the end result is, as long as they can protect for a couple of seconds, Cooper Kupp's all by himself in the middle of the field, and then he's just dynamite after the catch. Also, we're seeing a sea change in the NFL. It used to be the taller receivers got the touchdowns. Oh, okay, we're at the goal line, we'll throw a fade to the 6'3" guy, the 6'4" guy. And at the goal line, everybody wanted to go with the power back, the 230-pound running back. It's become a game of speed, of quickness, of decisiveness. And that's why you see running backs now can be 205, 210. Look at the season Austin Eckler had. He's not a traditional running back. He's not the classic 5'10", 230-pound guy. But people are worried maybe they'd pull him at the goal line. No, Austin Eckler's actually a heck of a goal line running back. And, Cooper Kupp, again, in the old days, you might think, okay, slot receiver, 5 to 7 touchdowns. No, that's a game of speed and quickness now, of leverage, of timing, of doing things after the catch. And that's why players like Kupp can be dynamic touchdown scorers. And it's just exciting to see as the college and pro games get closer together. It's just exciting to see the wide open concepts and the spread concepts becoming more a part of the NFL, because we're seeing that it's a game of space. It's a game of timing now.
I love that you mentioned names like Jerry Rice and Larry Fitzgerald. Just got to put a little perspective on this. So, like back in 1995, I think Jerry Rice had 1,965 yards. If you look at his career, he has over 5,000 fantasy points, over 303 games, which works into about 17 fantasy points per game, which is absolutely insane. You talk about that 2008 season for Larry Fitzgerald, 1,977 yards. Cooper Kupp this past season, playoffs included, plus you got a bonus game. Okay, we'll add that in there. 2,425 receiving yards. The difference between Cooper Kupp's season and the second best season of all time, that 1977, is the same gap difference between Larry Fitzgerald and the 87th best receiving season of all time. Those are facts. You can check them. Usually we don't check facts on this show, but I was doing a little bit of research and getting ready, and I was like, that was absolutely insane. But you know what else is insane? Me being the dinosaur that I am, watching what happened to my beloved running backs this season. 2021, I think the RBs, they took a big hit here. And I mean, those zero RB truthers, those hero anchor running back kind of strategies, they're starting to show us a little bit more about this position moving forward. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, but I love all that receiver stuff you mentioned, and I love the margin analysis. That's what fantasy football is ultimately about. It's not what you do; it's how valuable is what you do compared to everybody else. What's the margin involved? And that's what that's how we evaluate this stuff. And I love the way you broke that down. The thing with running back, I've been playing fantasy. I'll date myself a little bit here. I've been playing long enough where age 30 was the danger zone. Oh no, running back's turning 30. Get a walk away from him. That is out the window. We're at a point now where the second contract running backs make us nervous. And look at all the guys, or we get near that second contract, into your mid to late 20s. Look at some of the guys who hurt us this year. Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Ezekiel Elliott, Derrick Henry. These are all guys nowhere close to 30. And also we're talking, Le'Veon Bell is basically out of the league now. He's bounced around. You get a cup of coffee with a couple of teams this year, but he's basically got nothing left. These are guys who are on magazine covers, right? I mean, at one point, McCaffrey, obviously the best player in fantasy. Barkley was on magazine covers. Le'Veon Bell, had a moment where he was the best running back. A really poorly timed holdout. I bet he would do that differently if he could have done that a few years ago with the Steelers. But it just shows you that the thing with running backs, the analogy I make, I don't know if this is awkward or not, but this is the analogy I make. I consider it like if you live on West Coast time, okay, and then you go to New York City, and you go to a bar in New York City, and your body says, oh, it's 10 o'clock, it's 11 o'clock, it's midnight, but it's really 3 a.m. in New York City. It's 3 hours ahead. That's how I feel about running backs. When you think, oh, this guy's got 3 or 4 years left, no, you gotta like do the time zone adjustment and be like, maybe it's last call. Maybe there's nothing left. Somebody like Alvin Kamara, right? He just had the worst efficiency year of his career. He missed a bunch of time. There's an off-field issue now. We don't know how that's going to play out. Obviously, the quarterback's in flux. They never really solved that. Sean Payton has just left the building. These running backs are always closer to the end than you think. I grew up, again, dating myself. I grew up watching Earl Campbell play. For 2 or 3 years, he looked like the most untouchable running back in football. And then like 5 or 6 years down the road, he's out of football. He's retired, I think, before he turned 30. With the exception of Walter Payton, for the most part, these guys, it's hard to handle the workload. It's hard to handle the pounding. It's a young man's game. And so that's why, and who broke football this year at the running back position? It was Jonathan Taylor. I think we're all excited next year. And I don't know what Denver's going to do with Melvin Gordon. There's been whispers they want to keep him back. I think everybody's salivating at what Javonte Williams could do if he was the featured back in Denver. Even if they bring Gordon back, as long as they put Williams ahead of Gordon. Gordon didn't have a bad season last year, but
right.
It's just one of those things with running backs. When you think there's 2 or 3 more years left, I would chop at least 1 year off that, maybe 2. And once they get to the second contract, I get nervous. I feel very confident I'm going to have no Ezekiel Elliott next year. And the Cowboys were the leading scoring team in football. But Elliott had an okay season by volume because he played most of the games, but his efficiency metrics really suffered. He's not a good pass catcher. He's not really effective in the pass game anymore. Dallas might be the last team to realize that. We all see what Tony Pollard can do. No Ezekiel Elliott for me next year. This second contract for running backs has become something I'm really trying to walk away from. I want to go young at that position.
Yeah, so you gave us some players that you're kind of out on right now, and I know your mind's kind of geared towards baseball at the moment, but who are some must-have players for fantasy football for 22? And give us like a bold prediction for 22 as well. That'll be our last of our football talk.
Sure. Well, not that these guys are not going to be coveted, but I'm going to just try to get the young dynamic receivers that I can get. Justin Jefferson. I'm toying with the idea. I know Kupp just had an unbelievable season, but I'm toying with the idea of maybe having Justin Jefferson as my number 1 receiver. And I could conceivably take him. I think Taylor has to go number 1 in any draft, but I think Justin Jefferson's a top 5, top 6 pick. And I might take him as early as number 3. And my bold prediction is going to be that Justin Jefferson is going to score 20-plus touchdowns next year.
Heard it here first.
That is bold right there. We're going to put Justin Jefferson, Cooper Kupp-esque type season there, putting up the touchdowns for the Minnesota Vikings. Hopefully Kirk Cousins is their one slinging him the ball. We don't know. Maybe it's
let me say, pardon me, Matt. Let me say one other thing about this. I also think Minnesota is a great, if you dabble in team totals or you want to bet on, who might win the NFC, they underperform what their metrics said they should have been. Their metrics said they should have been a playoff team. I think Mike Zimmer is a good coach who just at some point, coaching is generally speaking not a long-term stay in one city. I mean, occasionally we see it. It's worked for Mike Tomlin. It's worked for Bill Belichick. But for the most part, you say what you're going to say, and after a few years, you get tuned out. I think it's just time for Mike Zimmer to go somewhere else. I still think he's a good man. He'll be a great defensive coordinator somewhere, maybe a good head coach somewhere. I'm not down on Mike Zimmer. But I think Minnesota's getting a new change and a new voice at the right time. I could see them. There's so many teams in the NFC who have problems right now. Brady just retired. The Saints are retooling. There's all sorts of drama always in Green Bay. I can see the Vikings winning that division and maybe even representing the NFC. I think they're going to be an overlay of their odds. I'm not saying by any means they're the favorite, but they should have been a winning team this year. They should have been a playoff team this year. They're a little bit unlucky, and maybe they made some of their own problems. I'll give you that. But there's a lot of much. Remember, I talked earlier about Baltimore, right? Didn't make the playoffs. A lot of things went wrong. I feel very confident Baltimore and Minnesota go back to the playoffs. I think they're both going to be intriguing, either over under total bets or maybe a long shot or a mini long shot to win their conferences. I'm going to look at both of those boards next year.
So just a yes or no, because I know we got to move on real quick, but Kirk Cousins, like, you trust Kirk? Like,
it's hard. It's hard to be really all in on Kirk Cousins.
Right.
I mean, a lot of times he feels like he's just good enough to lose with, but we might have said that about Matthew Stafford a year ago. It's just about having the right supporting cast, right?
Great point.
Well, speaking of supporting cast here, in part 2, we're going to talk about probably some people who are influential in your rise within the fantasy ranks, within the industry there itself. Who are those guys that are supporting you on your way up to the top as we go behind the grind in part 2, right after this quick commercial break. By the way, there's no commercial here, so I'm just going to hit the gong. We're going to get it on.